Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Elisa Ruffin with Leading Educators, and you are on the Grade 11 ELA Lesson Video Series. This is Unit 6, Week 5, Lesson 24, our last lesson for the week. And so let's get going. A brief overview of what we've accomplished so far this week. You've done first read annotations of a brief history of a short story. You've done your close read, those annotations, as well as questions and reflection. You've done a analysis and reading reflection questions. You've also done a chronology chart at this point, created a timeline, and now we're moving on to today, where you're going to review the text again, analyzing craft and structure. We're going to specifically look at metaphor and concept vocabulary, so word choice. Before we get into the real meat and bones of the lesson though today, remember that when you are done with the lesson activities, you need to share your learning with a family member, caregiver, or friend, complete the weekly fluency activity using a page from the text, and do at least 20 minutes of additional reading from a text of your choice. We've also come to that part, that wonderful part of the lesson where we do our riddle of the day. Remember, we're doing Rebus puzzles this week, where we are looking at pictures and trying to decode them. This is the last one for the week, so let's see if you are ready to go and decode. Here it comes. Take a moment to think of the answer, take in the image, gather those around who've been doing this with you, or if you're on your own, try to focus. And this is the point where you can pause the video because I'm going to reveal the answer if you want additional time. The answer for today's Rebus puzzle is headquarters. Headquarters. And I will say, I think that this one is a little bit tougher than the ones previously this week, because like when you think about 25%, you're not necessarily thinking about quarter, but 25% is a quarter of 100. And so when we think quarters, we oftentimes think monetarily, so that may not have been the first thing that came to mind. Either way, I really hope that you enjoyed the Rebus puzzles this week, kind of a break from our traditional riddle of the day. And now that we are all warmed up, let's make sure we have our materials. You need a brief history of a short story text, the Learning Packet Week 5 Lesson 24 note catcher, a pen or pencil. Remember, mobile devices are optional if you'd like to access the text digitally. A reminder of our background information for this text. Author G.F. McCourt wrote this nonfiction magazine article to give us an overview of the history of a short story, reaching all the way back to the 1820s and bringing it up to the present. It is connected to our essential unit question for Unit 6, what do stories reveal about the human condition? And then there is a specific guiding question that you've been wrestling with. How does this literary history shed light on the short story's ability to address the human condition? And the past couple of lessons, you have been addressing those two questions very specifically and directly. Looking at our learning targets for Lesson 24, I can explain how the author's word choice supports the main idea and theme of the text. I can explain how the author's use of extended metaphor supports the main idea of the text. As you know, we're going to continue in our normal routine of read, think, talk, write, and close. Today is no different. You are going to skim through the text again with this view in mind. Remember, craft and structure, we're taking off that reader's lens, putting on the writer's lens, and examining some of the author's choices. And while yesterday we looked at the author's choice to arrange and organize historical events chronologically in the text, today we're going to talk about his use of metaphor and his choices of vocabulary. To remind you, a metaphor is a comparison between two things without using like or as. An extended metaphor is when you continue that metaphor beyond a single line and you carry it through an entire piece. And this is what happened in this particular article. And so you're going to identify what that metaphor is and overall how that advanced the main idea of the story. So the think question for today is just that. How does the author's description of the story as if it was a living thing help support the main idea of the text? And then with a family member, caregiver, or friend, you're going to discuss the question from the think section and get their point of view as well, and record your answer in the note catcher. The right activity for today is that you are going to actually choose a different metaphor to generate a brief 3 to 5 sentence summary of the history of the short story. So you're not summarizing what McCourt wrote. You're going to take the facts, the historical facts and circumstances presented, and you're going to present it in your own way using a different metaphor than McCourt uses. So it's going to be really interesting generating a list of ideas of possible metaphors that you could use that accomplishes the same goal that D.F. McCourt does. And then closing, you're going to look at the concept vocabulary for this particular piece, and you're going to fill out a chart and answer the reflection question that goes along with it. I'm going to model all of those things for you in order. We're not going to pause here again because one activity builds on the next, and I want to make sure that you are set up for that and that you are able to take that momentum and carry it through the end of the lesson. So let's start with the think section. The think section, again, the question is, how does the author's description of the story as it was a living thing help support the main idea of the text? So here, what you're going to do is understand that there are moments in the text where he speaks about the short story as if it was an actual living, breathing thing. And we see this play out in the first paragraph, if you recall, from our first and close reads. He makes a connection, or a comparison, I should say, between the history of the short story and an infant. And he continues on using the same type of language related to life and having physical attributes as the text continues. So that being said, what you need to make sure that you do is that you go back to yesterday's assignment that required you to identify and explain the main idea, because we're going to put these two pieces together, and think about the connection between these examples and your explanation that you came up with. So yesterday you had to identify, which you had already done in the previous lesson, and then explain the main idea. So the two things that you're doing today is you're going to take that work that you did yesterday, identifying and explaining the main idea, and then going back to the metaphor or the comparison that D.F. McCourt is making and connect the two and talk about how that description lent itself to proving McCourt's or conveying McCourt's main idea. So you're going to take yesterday and today and connect them. And then you're going to make sure that you're including evidence from the text to support your answer, as always. Now, you already have a clue as to one piece of evidence or an example from the text you can use, and that's from paragraph 1. But go back to your previous annotations beyond paragraph 1 and see if you can glean some additional examples. Moving on to the right section, it asks you to use a different metaphor. So now that you have identified the extended metaphor presented in the text, you are going to select an additional metaphor that you could use to present the same type of information McCourt did, but obviously using a different metaphor. So it's going to be a brief piece, 3 to 5 sentences, so you're not rewriting the whole thing. At this point, you're very familiar with the details of the text because of the amount of times that you have read through, annotated, and reflected. So you're going to use those nuts and bolts of the text, those facts. At this point, you also have a timeline that you've created. And now you're going to generate a metaphor. Right? Remember, a metaphor is a comparison without using like or as. Right? So now that I'm familiar, if I'm going to approach this, and I'm you, now that I'm familiar with the history of the short story because of all of the activities that I've done, I need to take a minute to brainstorm a list of things that could be viewed as having characteristics in common with the short story. Doing so can help me decide on a metaphor to use. So I'm just going to kind of do some free thinking, list generating. If I think about the short story and I already know I'm trying to come up with a metaphor, what are some things that come to mind when I think about the history of the short story, right? And I'm going to write those things down and see if that leads me to a metaphor that I could use that is accurate and reflective of the main idea trying to be presented here. One way to put you on the right track for that, even if this is still a little bit confusing, one way to do this is to start by completing this sentence when you're brainstorming. The history of a short story is like, and then you fill in the blank. And you come up with as many examples as you can, comparative examples. The history of a short story is like a tree growing from a sapling to a large, mighty oak, right? That's an example of simile because I'm using like. But what you're ultimately going to do with the metaphor is you're going to pull out that term like, and you eventually can just say, the history of a short story is a tree, an oak tree, rooted and unmovable. Right? That's a metaphor. That's how I switch it up. But completing that sentence will allow you to generate and brainstorm a list of potential metaphors to use, and then allow you to do that reframing so that you're not using like or as, and that you're making sure it's connected to the main idea. So if I'm you, that is the type of thinking I would do to prepare me to engage in the right activity for today. Now we're going to move on to the closing activity. It is the concept vocabulary chart. There's only 3 words listed here, but there are 3 critical words in the overall piece. And you can find their definitions in the margins of your text. And as you've done with other concept vocabulary charts in the past, you're going to write down the definition of each term, and you're going to generate a synonym. Remember, a synonym is a word that has a similar meaning of the word presented here. So you're going to walk through that part of the concept vocabulary chart first. Then you're going to move on to the big question, which is the overall point of you engaging in the vocabulary exercise in the first place. How does the author's use of the concept vocabulary reflect the main idea of the text? And then cite some evidence from the text. So if I'm approaching this particular activity, once I have a full understanding of the word, both in and out of context, I can come up with a synonym, right? So that's my step 1. I'm going to go find the definition of the words in the margin. Now I understand, whether it's in a sentence or not, what this word means based on the definition, and then I'm going to read the information around the word and the context in which the author is using it to get a better impression of which definition the author is using and intends in this regard. And doing that will help me think of a word that's similar that could also be substituted there, right? And then I'm going to generate that list of words. After I've done that, I need to think about what the author's intentions may have been in using that particular word. And again, reading the word in context can help reveal that for me. And my understanding of the overall main idea of the text will also point me toward the author's intentions. Right? And then I will have a better understanding of why the author chose these words to convey the main idea and make sure that there was a clear understanding of what the message is, right? So step 1, make sure that you go through, define those words in and out of context, meaning both in the margins based on the definition provided, and then reading the wording and the context in which the word is used. Generating those synonyms, so words that could be substituted for it, so I can have a vision of what could have been there and wasn't, because the author would have been aware of those words as well. And then thinking through the overall context and tone, etc., and message of the article, and why the author may have chosen the words listed as opposed to the synonyms that you chose. And then connect that to the main idea. You're going to cite examples from the text to support it, as always, because we want to make sure that any claims we make are rooted in our understanding of the text. Another tall order as it relates to activities, but you are more than prepared to do this. You've done a lot of heavy lifting with your critical thinking and examination of the text over the past few days, all of which has set you up really, really well to complete these activities for today. So it's your turn now. You're going to read through the text again, skimming. I encourage you to review your annotations, your summary, your responses to reflection questions to help you as well. Review your understanding of the meaning of extended metaphor. Remember, it's a comparison between 2 things without using like or as that's carried throughout the course of a text. And then talking through that with a family member, friend, or caregiver to clarify your understanding. Then you're going to move on to that right section where you're going to select another metaphor to use and summarize some key historical events from the story in another way using that metaphor. And then finally, you're going to complete the concept vocabulary chart and answer the reflection question that goes along with it. All right? So we finally come to the end of our lessons for the week. Bravo and congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. If as you're finishing out these last activities, you get stuck, remember that you can always pause and replay this video as many times as necessary. And you can always reach out to your teachers via email for some support using the information provided. Don't forget, as you celebrate a close to another series of lessons, that you also need some additional work. You have to share your learning with a family member, caregiver, or friend. You need to complete the weekly fluency activity and do some additional reading from a text of your choice. So don't neglect to do that. That will really round out your learning for this week. And again, we've come to the end of our series of lessons for the week, an end to another text. I'm so excited. You did a phenomenal job, and we're going to be back together again, and you're going to be engaging in another exciting text that you'll find out about, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. You all do well on this final closing activity, as I know you will.